Hi, everybody. This is Marlene with Miami Ghost Chronicles Stories of the Supernatural. And I hope you enjoy this new show, whether you're viewing it on the internet or listening to a podcast version of the episode. I do want to thank you for being part of my audience. You can also find links to videos or podcasts on MiamiGhostChronicles.com, as well as where you can submit your story about any eerie experiences you've had, which I would love to hear about. Just go to the Submit Your Story tab. Please subscribe to our channel so that you receive notification of when we release a new show. And find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. This is where I usually live stream and where I give you a behind-the-scenes look at locations where new episodes are being filmed at. I also tell you about all the interesting guests that will be appearing soon on Stories of the Supernatural. I hope you enjoy the show, and I think you are all wonderful. Hi, everybody. This is Marlene with Miami Ghost Chronicles Stories of the Supernatural. How is everybody doing tonight? Because it's nighttime here. And because, I'm in Florida, so, and even though it's summertime, of course, by 8, it's still daytime, but it's getting dark. The creepy time, twilight. And, I've spoken before about, despite what everybody thinks about midnight or 3 a.m. being the spookiest or the creepiest or the time you see the most paranormal phenomena, not really. Not really. But anyway, today I have a super, super special guest. I have a gentleman by the name of Dave Spinks, and I'm sure you've heard of him. You've probably even seen him or heard him on other shows. First of all, Dave is a paranormal investigator after my own heart because he's been doing it for just as long as I have. He has been doing it since 1986, researching and investigating the paranormal, that is, various aspects due to several experiences he had as a young man. Now, he retired from a 20-year career in the U.S. military and federal law enforcement in 2011, and since then he has investigated on a full-time basis. And he's conducted several hundred investigations, of course, in researching the supernatural. So in other words, he not only does he investigate it as a researcher, he also has written books. He also investigates reports of strange creatures, cryptids, as well as UFO encounters. And you guys know that when I talk about the paranormal, it's not specifically just about ghosts or hauntings. All of that falls into that, as far as I'm concerned. Now, recently, Dave purchased an infamous haunted house known as the Willow's Weep. And this is in order to further study of the phenomena related to hauntings. And he also has been featured on numerous syndicated radio shows and as a guest at paranormal conferences as well, as a guest speaker on just about anything that having to do with the supernatural. So, before I go any further, let me get him on. How are you doing today?
I'm just fine. How are you? Thank you for having me.
Oh, absolutely. It is my pleasure. So, Dave, I am going to ask you what I ask all my guests. And obviously, like I said, you're very much into the paranormal. And I know there's mention there that you had experience as a young man. But when was it that you had your first encounter with the paranormal? Was it as a child or after you grew up a little bit more?
Well, I grew up, really, I guess I'd have to obviously say the time me and my grandfather saw a Bigfoot on a fishing trip, and here in West Virginia. Yeah, that's what really got me started. I talked about that, on Destination America on the show Terror in the Woods.
Mm-hmm.
I actually wrote a piece in David Weatherly's Wood Knock series about it. And one thing led to another, and next thing you know, I was on a TV show talking about it. And I also just completed my first Bigfoot book, primarily on West Virginia Bigfoot,
Okay. All right.
and all that stuff is in there. It's basically we were fishing, in the summertime, and I would always come back and stay with my grandparents, both sets, and my dad, because my mom and dad were divorced when I was really young.
Okay.
And in the summer, I would always spend time with each of my grandpas and my dad, and me and my grandpa took off on a weekend fishing trip to our favorite spot. And long story short, something started throwing these huge boulders at us from across the other side of the river. And the first one we didn't see. We just heard a humongous splash, and we jumped up. We were startled. It was right before dark, about this time of night, matter of fact. And we looked around. We couldn't see anything. We just heard the splash. Didn't see anything floating in the river, and we chalked it up as well. Maybe a big branch fell out of a tree, hit the water. Something rolled off because the other side of the river, it was pretty much 45 degrees straight uphill. It's this area where no other people would. I mean, it was too rugged for people to go on that side of the river. Because if you've ever been to West Virginia, it's a really mountainous state, really steep mountain, especially where we were in this particular location. So we figured, well, we just chalked it up, and we went back and sitting down to it next to our fire, relaxing, and then another rock came, and I saw that one come up through the trees because I heard it hitting the branches, and it was huge. I mean, I don't even know how to describe it. I mean, I couldn't get my arms around it as a grown man. It was that big of a rock. And the river was probably 75 yards across at that particular area, and it landed almost out in the middle of the river, and it made another huge splash. Of course, by then, my grandpa's running for the tent, and I know what he's doing. He's going to get the shotgun.
Okay.
We didn't see what threw the rock at this time, but he grabbed the shotgun, and in his mind, he's thinking there's some people over there messing with him.
Right, yeah. He's not thinking Bigfoot. He's thinking human people, like, oh, okay.
And I'm just sitting there, I'm 13 years old. I'm a little kid, basically, and my eyes are as big as saucers, and I'm like, what's going on? Because I look at my grandpa, and when he had that look on his face, he was not scared of anything. He was a Baptist minister for 40 years. So he also stormed the beaches at Normandy in World War II. So, nothing scared this man.
Yeah.
So he yelled out across the river, "You heathens, knock it off, or I'm going to shoot." And then this blood-curdling roar, just like you've never heard. This.
Oh, wow.
And I mean, every time I think of it right now, I'm getting the cold chills because it scared the living hell out of me. And so he racks off a shot, in that direction. We don't see what's making this noise. And then I don't know if he hit it or what. It let out another freaking crazy scream, and he yells at me, "Get to the truck, boy." And he's still hollering, and he lets off 5 or 6 more shots, And then I'm cowering down beside the bumper of the truck, peeking around, and that's when I see the thing. And I saw it from, like, the waist up, and it was smacking trees, screaming. And these trees are probably 40, 50, 60-foot tall trees, and the tops of them are shaking as he hits them. And this thing, it was massive, and I was scared to death. So I guess around that time is when he saw it too, and it's roaring and just making a crazy racket going up out of there, and it was going away from us. He might have hit it. I don't know.
Okay.
But he comes running towards me, grabs me with one arm, and throws me in the truck, and he said, "We're getting out of here, son. That's not of God." And we peel out of there, and I think the truck's going to fall apart because it's an old dirt road with potholes, and he's done. And the truck's bottoming out. He sounds like pieces are falling off. And I'm just sitting there with my hands in my, covering my face thinking I'm going to die. This thing's going to get us. The truck's going to break down and it's going to come back and get us, So we get out of there. He drives around for a little bit and he pulls off the side of the road and he says, "Son, we better not tell anyone this because they're going to think we're crazy."
I bet.
He goes, he said, we can't tell anyone this. And we made a promise to each other to never talk about it. Well, 2 years ago now, he died, and I said I got to tell this story because I've been researching this stuff ever since, and I went to tell my uncle about it because I wanted to give him a heads up before they seen me on TV talking about it,
All right.
When I told my uncle, he said, "Oh, you're talking about that monkey man you and Papa saw on the woods," and I said, "What?" He told me.
So here you're thinking, I'm gonna let the cat out of the bag, and he.
Yeah, and here my grandpa, my uncle says, "Well, yeah, he came to me like 20 years ago, and he said, my uncle's name's Stanton, and he said, Stanton, I got to get this off my chest in case something ever happens." And he told him the whole story. Me and Dave saw this this creature down on the Gauley River when we were fishing. So that's when I really started, I wanted more answers as I got older. But something else happened to me when I was 16.
Okay.
And before I really started researching and stuff, I was always looking, I would see newspaper articles, because back then we didn't have the internet, and I would read different stories at the school library of people who had seen strange things, and my interest was really piqued, but it still scared the living hell out of me, because I didn't go in the woods for several years after that.
I bet.
And so my other grandpa, this is really weird too. Both my grandpas started me off in the paranormal, but my other grandpa was also a World War II veteran, and he smoked like a freight train, smoked the old Camel non-filter cigarette.
Oh, yeah.
He had a quarter of one lung left, and he had a trach tube, and he had to pull around an oxygen tank everywhere he went.
Oh.
So we knew, if he wasn't going to be with us that much longer. He was always, having problems and whatnot. And then they found out he had cancer. But anyway, I was at my dad's house, which is 30 miles away from his house, and I was sleeping. It was the middle of the night, and something woke me up in the middle of the night, and I sat straight up in the bed, and there's my mom's dad standing at the foot of the bed looking at me, clear as day, solid like me and you. And I'm like, what do you do? I kind of did that double take. Am I seeing it? I said, what are you doing here, Papa? Because there was no reason that in the middle of the night he wouldn't have gone to my dad's house anyway. You know what I mean?
Right.
Regardless, in the middle of the night. And he just kind of smiled at me and then disappeared right in front of my face.
Wow.
So I was like, wow, that was a weird dream. So I went back to sleep, But I woke up the next day and it was bothering me still. And I was like, I'm going to call up there and check on him. And I called up there to Grandma and Grandpa's house, and my uncle from out of state answered. And I said, what are you doing there? He said, no one called you yet, Dave? I said, no, what are you talking about? He said, Grandpa died last night. Everybody's coming in. And
wow.
I kind of just dropped the phone. I was like, wow, that's crazy. And I was like, I can't tell anybody about that dream. So I waited like 6 months, and I couldn't hold it in anymore. We were eating dinner at Grandma's house. A bunch of the family was there. And I came out and told everybody about that dream the night he died. And several of my family's faces went funny, and they all had the same exact thing happen to them. And I knew right then and there that he had come to say goodbye to us.
Yeah, exactly.
And after that, those two experiences, I said, man, there's this stuff out there we don't understand. I want to know. And I started just diving in headlong to it. Anything I could find, anything I could read. And I started watching that show In Search Of with Leonard Nimoy, and I saw a guy named Hans Holzer on there.
Right.
So I was like, hey, I got a recorder just like that. I had that old big tape deck, that cassette deck with the plug-in mic. And whenever we would go to family vacations and stuff, different locations, I would take that recorder, and I actually started capturing EVPs, Native American monuments, ruins, and I was hooked. And over the years, being in the military and then federal law enforcement, people knew people that were having strange things happen in their house, and they say, hey, I know this guy that investigates that stuff, and then that's how it all started,
exactly.
The ball got, and so on and so forth. And now I've just, when I retired, and I didn't talk about what I did because I was still, active duty, military and law enforcement. They would have sent me this, So I never went public. And then when I retired, I said, I'm going to go public with what I got, and what I do. That's how it all came about.
Right. And I understand perfectly what you mean that, and people don't realize, depending, I guess, on your age that, because of all those shows that they have nowadays, 20 years or 25 years back, you had maybe unsolved mysteries. It's not like it is now, and you don't have all the equipment. You had no digital camera, things like that. You maybe had a recorder, and if you used your camera, you had to spend money in developing the film, hoping you capture something. It was a lot more basic, which sometimes that was not a bad thing. You did what you could with what you had. But yeah, and I remember Hans Holzer. He was like one of the first ones that actually wrote about his experiences. But even so, even when he wrote those books, he was almost in a way kind of a skeptic, even though he was bringing all these psychics. But yeah, he was one of the first ones
Yeah.
that I read books about paranormal investigations, not just the ghost story, in other words, because
Yeah. Hmm.
he was the one that actually went in there to try to communicate or identify and everything. So once let's say in that crisis apparition or what that you spoke about with your grandfather, after that, what happened? Did you ever have other experiences outside of an actual investigation? Or was it just when you started capturing EVPs that you kind of start thinking, okay, it's you could go to certain places and you're going to be able to capture some type of evidence, even
Yeah.
if
Well, the only like I didn't have any personal experiences at home until many years later after I had conducted some crazy amount of investigations, and I think I, pulled home some followers with me
oh
here and
yeah,
there.
yeah, that
Of course, I had many experiences that were phenomenal over my years of investigating, but
mhm.
my having anything like happen to me with my grandfather, no, nothing with my family. My mom died when I was 22,
Okay.
and and I never ever tried to communicate with her or anything because we just really don't know exactly what we're communicating with at
Oh,
this point. We can't,
absolutely. Absolutely.
and I know, it's my personal of my personal opinion that some of these negative entities, whatever they are, will try to impersonate your loved ones to
Oh,
gain your trust.
yeah.
And I've had a few of them try to do that over the years, and I would ask very personal questions that only me and my mom would know,
Mhm.
and they couldn't answer them, but they would say a lot of stuff that was a roundabout that was very close, but not close
Not
enough.
quite.
And then I knew right then to cut off that communication and stop it. So, you got to be really careful. I often talk about the dangers of this because it can be dangerous. Um,
Yes.
After one particular investigation I did up in Pennsylvania, I actually lived in this notorious haunted house that the Warrens were associated with, and definitely pulled something home with me there. I had like the worst year of my life. Went through a lot of personal issues that were out of the norm for me. Um,
Mhm.
Happened after that particular investigation because I spent a month in that house and went back 3 more times. I also, right after that, noticed a lump on my leg. I can't say this is paranormal, but
Right.
the coincidence is really crazy. I had a lump come up on my leg, and it got bigger and bigger. I went to because I go to the VA since I'm a veteran, and I saw one doc, and he said, "Oh, just keep an eye on it." And I'm like, "Doc, it's getting bigger, and it's getting
Mhm.
bigger fast." Well, long story short, I moved, got a new VA doctor, and they said they did a couple of X-rays and CAT scans and MRIs. I said, "Man, that's coming out of there. It's huge inside your leg, dude."
Wow.
Turns out it had cancer inside of it. So I can't say that's paranormal, but that's really weird in
Yes.
nature. Okay, and then I had all this other stuff. I went almost financially ruined during that time. That whole year, I
Oh.
had some crazy stuff happen. Crazy dreams where these shadow figures were reaching at me every night for like 15, 20 days. And they
Mhm.
would get close every night. And then finally, one night in the dream, one of them grabbed my arm and I woke up and I had a tear in my shirt and a scratch on my arm. So
Yeah.
when you put all that stuff together, you kind of sit back and say, hey, there's no such thing as that much coincidence. There was something very negative. And this house was notoriously negative. Every family that ever moved into that house would move out very soon after. They
Mhm.
all were never had any kind of alcohol problems or
Right.
drug problems, and a lot of them, almost every couple that moved in there got a divorce. One or both turned into alcoholics or drug addicts.
Wow.
And a whole slew of different families were in and out of there. We researched the records. It was over and over and over again in this house.
Right. And I imagine that's usually What they record is sales. If it was ever rented, there's sometimes no way to find out that you got a revolving door of renters. Unless a neighbor that will tell you, yeah, people rent that place and they move right out like within a couple of months.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I know exactly what you mean, and it's really funny, Dave, because as a matter of fact, my last show at the end, I was talking, I was to my audience, and I was telling them if you've been a paranormal researcher for any length of time, there will come a time where I call it, you take a sabbatical, okay, where something starts to intrude, where you say, I need to cut off a little bit from this because it'll bleed over. And I'm going to give you a perfect example. Even though I've been doing paranormal research since the 90s myself, even though I had a lot of interest in it before, and I was unofficially doing it. But besides from that, I'm a trained hypnotherapist. And at one time, I had like a separate garage on my property, and I had converted that into an office. And because I did into alternative hypnotherapy, and one of the areas that people sometimes would come to me would be for attachments, spiritual attachments. That, you address it through hypnotherapy. That's and not all the time, because sometimes it's just a spiritual attachment of a regular dead person, like a human entity, in other words, a discarnate. But a couple of times I had run-ins with something that I call non-human, because I'm not really into using the D word. I think it's overused. Plus, there's a lot of non-human entities out there that don't really fall into the category just of demons. There's elementals, et cetera, et cetera. But anyway, kind of a couple of times I ran into stuff like that. Luckily, it wasn't really highly intelligent. But I kind of was getting the effect of that, and I said, you know what? I got to stop seeing people that come here for this on my property. Even though it was a detached garage from my main house, and it speaks very similar to what you're describing. I didn't have, I had a couple of things that turned out to be health scares, but like you said, certain things that you kind of feel unease and finally, when you go back to the point of origin, what you're talking about is exactly that. And after that, I stopped bringing people over to that office to do hypnosis with them, because it was just too close to my home. In other words, it's a lot of people think, that once you do some of these investigations and you're talking an intelligent, malevolent entity, that once you leave that location, sometimes it stays, but other times it doesn't. Especially if you have some type of vulnerability. And I tell everybody, even when you're a paranormal researcher, if you go into a location that's got an intelligent haunting and it's malevolent, darker, not your regular confused person, they usually, especially in a team, if they want you out, they're going to go and target your weakest link or the weakest member of your team, whether it's weak physically, temporarily, you're exhausted, you're tired, you're overwrought, you got something going on emotionally in your house, or in your life, and you need they target you. And I think a lot of times people, in all this eagerness to do paranormal research, they overlook that, especially when they're part of a team, because it can lead to something along the lines of what you just described happened to you.
Oh, absolutely. I agree 100%. There's a lot of things that can happen to you. And I agree, having something like that close to your home, I see these people and they're constantly doing ghost boxes and whatnot out in their houses, and one particular incident I can think of, and I actually had worked with this couple one time, as Mark and Debbie Constantino.
Absolutely. I know that is.
Yeah, we all know what happened in that story.
Yes.
You have to have a safe space. You can't bring this stuff into your house, and it's very dangerous, to do that.
Yes.
In my personal opinion, I'm not saying I know more than everybody else. I'm not saying that, I'm the end all say all, but I know after having many years of experience, I've seen numerous paranormal investigators that were friends of mine that got really deep into this. They were doing it nonstop.
Yes.
And I know people to this day that ride around in the car with a ghost box running. I mean, they're nonstop
They're
and they wonder
crazy.
what
They're crazy.
and crazy stuff go on at their house and in their dreams and everything else. You have to separate yourself at some point. Prime example for me, I was going me and my partner David Weatherly, who I work with a lot now. 3 years in a row, we really hit it hard. I mean, we were doing averaging 35 to 40 investigations a year,
Okay, that's a
and
lot.
we kind of took a break last summer. And my last investigation was last October at my house, Willow's Weep, because I'm still doing preliminary stuff myself there. But I hadn't investigated up until last week since last October. I took a break. I did a lot of
Mm-hmm.
writing,
Right.
and really lifted. I feel great. My energy's replenished, if that makes sense.
Yes,
Uh,
absolutely.
I feel much better. And, that last year, I mean, I was physically and mentally drained, and not to mention I had
Yes.
to go through surgeries and everything.
Yep.
So, I said, look, I'm going to take a step back. I'm going to get some of the vast amount of stuff and knowledge I have on paper, get it out there in some books
Mm-hmm.
and stuff that I've been wanting to do for a while. And, sometimes you got to do that.
Oh, yeah.
It's not a competition. It's not a race to see who can do the most. There's a lot of people out there that are trying to do that. Which, at some point, it's going to take a toll on you, mentally, physically, and spiritually. It's going to take a toll on you. I'm telling you here right now, it
Well,
will.
you know what it is also, Dave? A lot of people, how everybody tells you, okay, depending on your beliefs, prayers or smudging or saging or, people, they do all these things. Let's say they're going into an investigation. They do all these things for protection. And, if your aura is thinned out because you're under emotional and or physical stress, for whatever reason, it could even be that you're coming down with a flu. How's that? Okay. Or you're
Right.
overextending yourself and you're just really tired, or your job has gotten crazy, or maybe you got stuff going on at home. Situational. It happens to everybody. All these things, and of course, if you've got something more serious going on, of course your aura thins out. And my point being, I don't care how much you sage and pray, if your aura is thinned out, you are
Yep.
going to be more vulnerable to an attack if that's what you encounter. You know, and as well as I do, if you've been, that sometimes you go to locations, either one, A, they're not haunted, or two, maybe what's there is residual or very low grade, maybe somebody that's kind of confused, but not that, no malevolence or um, wanting to basically like a hitchhiker or anything like that, and you just never know until you get there what you're going to encounter. And if it's really dark and you've got that chink in the armor, like I said before, I don't care how much protecting you think you did, you're still very vulnerable. So I,
I
I
agree.
understand what you mean that you took time off. Yeah,
Yep.
absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, I had to get my physical health back. I went through those. I had to do 2 major surgeries on my leg. I had to take the thing out of me, and then they had to reconstruct my muscles and move stuff
Wow.
around. Luckily, it wasn't in the bone. It wasn't spread anywhere.
That
So,
was pretty major then. That was wow.
yeah, it did. After I had the first surgery, I was like 2 days later, I was at a conference speaking, and then I had to go have another surgery. So, I mean, everyone's like, dude, you got to take a break, and I did.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
it helped.
Yeah. And I'm going to say something, and I know a lot of people are out there going, and I said, look, at the end of the day, as much as, let's face it, paranormal research, at least in this field, it's about dead people, the dead, and you're alive.
Yeah.
And what happens is, if you start getting, like when you describe that, people that are riding around, like trying to capture, basically you start keeping too much company with the dead, and pretty soon they want you to stay with them. Like, hey, come on over to this side. People don't realize that. That's how it works. That's why you got to have these boundaries. As much
And
as
they
you...
have no concept of time. They have no
Oh,
concept.
absolutely not. Absolutely not. No, none whatsoever. But it's almost like, hey, it's really hard to talk to you on that side. If you come over here, let's see if we can bring you over here to be with us
Hmm.
so that we
Yeah.
can keep company. And that's what people don't realize, that's why it's really important when you do this type of work. And one of the things that you said, Dave, as far as nowadays, everybody wants to capture evidence, and I understand all of that because at the end of the day, really, that's what people want is proof. But like what you described when you had that experience with your grandfather, you didn't have equipment or camera, but there's something that when you experience that firsthand, that you know it. I mean, it's not that you can prove it or want to prove it or need to prove it. The only one you proved it to is yourself. How's that?
Yep.
That everything changes for you. In other words, as far as when you do this, when you're into paranormal work and stuff like that, it's like, even if I never capture the great photograph or that evidence that nobody can say, it's like it. There's something, a paradigm shift inside of you that changes you from then on. And there's people out there that go into doing the ghost hunting stuff, and then when they have their first real encounter, they can't handle it. They book it. They just like, what do you mean this thing is really real? It's like, yeah.
Oh, you see many rookie investigators coming in. They're very highly skeptical. I was skeptical to some point too with my law enforcement background, but I knew what I as a young man. And I knew there was something to it. But there's a lot of people out there that have never had an experience, and they want to go out and see for themselves. And when they do see something that's legit, most times, not every time, but most times, they're out of there, man. Their mind is blown.
Yeah.
And they're like, "What the frick was that? I'm done, man. Get me out of here."
Yeah, it is. It is. And then others that do the investigation, it's really boring and nothing happens, and they're like, "This is it." And they're like, "Yeah, this is it."
Oh yeah, they think they're going to go and do it like they see on TV, and they're going to be there an hour, and all kinds of crazy stuff's going to happen. What they don't realize is those people are there for over a week,
Yes,
and
exactly.
Remember that, I always talk about this. TV is entertainment, folks. What you see is not necessarily real. They might capture some legit evidence here and there, but they're under constraints that they gotta keep their ratings up. You gotta remember that. So what they capture on TV, it could be fake, it could be real. You don't know. It's entertainment. So,
right. Yes, like you said, they're under pressure because otherwise, like I said, some of the investigations have been, which sometimes it's not that nothing was there. Sometimes it's just that the timing was off. And that's another thing. The supernatural is not an on-demand thing.
Nope.
Sometimes, no, there isn't anything there, or it's really residual. And other times, it's just the timing is wrong. You go one day and nothing happens, and then you go back a month later, and it's like, it's crazy. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Prime example for that for me was I went to Bobby Mackeys, notoriously demonic, blah, blah, blah.
Okay.
First time I ever went there, nothing happened. Okay. I was like, okay. So, I'm thinking in my mind, okay, I'm going to come back another time and see what happens. Mm-hmm. So probably a year and a half to 2 years later, I go back to that place, and the activity was just off the hook. I got Class A EVPs, even so much so that Bobby Mackey himself said an EVP I captured was definitely Carl's voice. His maintenance man died.
Wow, right, yes. I had seen that they had interviewed him, of course, before he died. And you could tell he has kind of a distinctive voice.
Yeah, so and he said, that's definitely Carl, man. He's a hardcore skeptic himself. Yeah. It blew him away when we played that EVP back I got, so that's a prime example of that, and I've gone back another time and got some good stuff, but it wasn't as active as the second time I was there. So you just never know what you're going to get when you do this stuff.
Well, I want to say, God, time flies, like 2014. Yeah, it was 2014. Sometimes I went out there. I mean, we did some other things, and unfortunately, wrong timing. It was like early, like mid-afternoon, so of course Bobby Mackeys was closed. And I hooked up with Wanda Case, and Wanda Case used to do the tours over at Bobby Mackeys. So I talked to her, and we ended up doing another tour some other place, which was great because there was nobody else except us. And I could tell she was very hesitant. She didn't really want to talk too much about Bobby Mackeys. And I asked her, "You're not doing tours?" "Nope, I'm not doing." Later on, we started talking, and I told her, "Look, I'm a paranormal researcher. I've been doing." And she tells me, "Look, I don't even go there. I do not go there. I consider that place dangerous." She goes, "At one point, I would just, in other words, she had tried scaling it back where she would just take groups of people, like a individual, and she said, I think it's dangerous. Whatever is there is demonic. I don't even go into that building if I can help it." And she passed away. I think it was last year. She
Last year, yeah.
and I never forgot that conversation I had with her because you could tell by looking. I mean, she had a lot of experience in, even back then she was doing paranormal tours of other locations there in that area. But
Uh-huh.
she told me flat out, first she didn't want to talk about it. And then when she finally did, she goes, I just don't go there. I don't like that place. It's, nope.
Yep. And she was a friend of mine, and we became pretty good friends. And
Okay.
I would talk to her on the phone quite often. And she, she was feeling real down, and like she wasn't feeling good a lot and stuff. So she finally went and got tested, and found out she had cancer all over.
Yes.
And her husband was also a DJ there at Mackeys for some time. And right after she died, he also passed away of cancer.
Are you serious? I did not know that.
Within months. So, was it paranormal? We don't know, but really, really weird.
As a matter of fact, I remember when I went there, she had just switched out. She was going to a new location. She
Yep.
had switched from one office to another one. She was right in the middle of that.
Yeah, she had Wanda Case Ghost Shop right down the road. I mean, it was like 5-6 miles away from
Right,
Bobby
right,
Mack.
right. And this was she was right in the middle of this, and this, and we talked about it, and later on when I found out, I was like, wow. I mean, when I met her, I mean, you don't know, but she seemed okay at that time that I met her. But then
Yeah, I investigated her shop because she called it the Haunted Gamblers Museum, and it was haunted as crap too. It was really active right down the road, and she, I had gone there twice, and then right after the second time, I hadn't talked to her for quite a while, and then she told me, she found out she had cancer and stuff, and she was getting it treated, and she was actually doing really well for a while, and then bam, out of nowhere, she's gone.
yes, I did not. I'd followed her progress like on Facebook because they would update on how she was doing, and I saw what you're talking about, that she had gotten better, and then all of a sudden on one of the times I said, oh, you know what, let me check, and she had passed away, and I did not know that about her husband passing away either. But like I said, when I had that conversation with her, she was very serious about it. Like you say, was that part of it? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe it was just one of those things that it was going to happen no matter what. But at the same time, I understand there's still that question mark there as to the influence of something there at that location. And you had your own experiences there while you were there. And I was telling, I was, because I did do a little bit of research into the Pearl Bryan story, and I say, you know what, there's a lot of stuff that went on there even prior to that. A little bit, there was a big, they were building a bridge there over the Licking River, and while it was under construction, it collapsed, and a bunch of men got killed. Really, really close there to Bobby Mackey. So, I mean, people don't realize sometimes it doesn't have to be right on the spot. You could get entities that drift over, depending on what's going on. But yeah, it was pretty. Yeah, it's. Sometimes people don't realize that you could have a cast of characters there, Bobby Mackeys, that nobody suspects, except the fact that they're dark, I guess is my point.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. You never know what you get. There's a lot of stories of people just, they took a walk through a graveyard, and next thing you know, they had something at their house going on. You just never know. Spirits, in my opinion, can travel pretty much wherever they want to go.
Yes.
Not all of them are stuck at one location. Some of them are free movers, if you will. So, they can follow you home. And, I learned that the hard way early on. I had to protect my house and keep everything away from me. But that doesn't always work, too. I mean, when you do what I do, you can still carry stragglers along with you, because they're attracted to your light. They're attracted to your energy. They want that.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I remember I consider myself always a freelance researcher, investigator. I worked with a team that does all the state of Florida. And normally, if they had somebody in South Florida, or if they were short somebody and I was willing to travel, I would help out. And sometimes we got together with other team, other members of other teams. And everybody would crack up sometimes because I would pull around the corner from an investigation. I would stop and I would start smudging my entire car down and open up the trunk. And I'm
Yep.
like, folks, I'm not taking any chances. And they'd look at me and they're, Marlene, what are you doing? I'm like, just a little insurance. Make sure nobody wants
Oh,
to tag along.
yep.
And like you said, especially if you know if you're sensitive, which I think after a while that you do this type of work, you do develop sensitivity and everything, as far as whether it's as an empath or hearing things or seeing things. Yeah, you develop that muscle when you do this type of work. And let me ask you, Dave, this house that you got now, Willow's Wheat. What's going on with that? What is the history on that house?
Well, the house was. I first came to know of Willow's Wheat through a friend of mine as a location to investigate. They had seen a video another group had put out on it, and this was like 4 or 5 years ago. And let me think here. It's 2018. So it was about 2012, 2013 when I found out about this place. So me and this girl, who's a friend of mine, we went and investigated it the first time I ever went there. Got some pretty crazy stuff, and I became friends with the owner. Both of us did. And I went back another time with another group from Indiana, which is where my house is at. And it was two ladies that are friends of mine that investigate up there all the time, and went with them. And then I went back again, and I had built kind of a relationship with the owner. And my friend that went there with me the first time last summer told me, hey, Brenda, I talked to Brenda, which was her name, and she said she wants to sell Willow's Weave, and she wants one of us to have it. She doesn't want anybody else to have it because it's so dark in nature. She knows that I could handle it or whatever.
Right.
So I called her up. I said, what's going on? And I knew that her husband had been having some problems, some medical problems, and I'm not going to go into that. It's private. But long story short is she felt the house was doing this, and her family had been attacked. She came about owning this house out of pure just happenstance. She was looking for a home for her son.
Okay.
And she doesn't remember how she came. She's from Illinois. She was from Illinois, which is like 20 miles away on the border, right?
Okay.
She doesn't remember how she came to this little bitty town known as Cayuga, Indiana. She ended up in this town, came straight to this house and found this house was for sale. So they contacted the owner. The owner met him out there, and he went to let him in the door, and then they went in, and he wouldn't go in.
Oh.
They're like, aren't you going to come in? And he's like, no. Well, he said, you all go ahead and look around and let me know what you think. So they went in there, looked around. There was a pipe laying up against the wall, and it flew about 10 or 15 feet across the room and smashed her son right in the head, hurting him pretty good. Like, I think it cut his head open and everything.
Wow.
So they came out of there, like, they chalked it up as just a freak accident, but she knew, later on she knew it wasn't a freak accident. And come to find out, the owner that was outside was the son of the last man who had lived in that house. And come to find out that the last man that lived in the house had shot himself in the head, and the chair was still in the house with his blood all over it that he died in.
And he just forgot to mention that little bit, I'm sure. Oh
yeah,
my.
He went ahead and told them, listen, I don't go in there because my dad killed himself. His dad's stuff's still in the house, the chair with the blood on it, his personal his shoes, his hat, some of his fishing poles are on the wall. And that's just the tip of the iceberg with this place. There's been at least 2 suicides in the house, possibly 3, numerous other deaths in this house, strange happenings. The house is it was built in the 1800s, like I said, built in the shape of the cross, facing due. It's got windows in the corners of all the corners of the house of the cross.
Okay.
It's when Brenda went ahead and bought the house, because it was such a good price, she went ahead and bought it for her son anyway. They had a laminate floor over top of the original floor, put a new floor in. Well, it was all hooved up from moisture, so they had to tear that out. Upon tearing that floor out, in the corner, they found a book that dealt with necromancy, communicating with spirits, and all kinds of other stuff.
Oh, wonderful.
with all these things started happening. Her son was attacked in the house, choked, lifted up off the floor. They never moved into the house because of the things. When they were refurbishing it, trying to fix it up to be livable, those type of things were happening, and there was a whole bunch of different stuff that happened. Well, she started doing research on the house, talking to the neighbors and everything. Found out about the other deaths. There's at least 7, 8, probably 9 deaths in this house. Okay. The guy who originally built the house was either a postman or a postmaster who was into some weird stuff, because he built the house in the shape of a cross facing east, just right off the get go.
Right.
And it originally had 6 entrances and exits to the house. Well,
really?
over the years they changed it and put windows in some of those exits and entrances, and now there's only 2 entrances and exits. But there was a false ceiling in it. There was, in the original floor plans, there's supposed to be a stairwell up to the attic. There is no stairs in the house. It had a false ceiling that was about 4 feet high in it. And in the middle, if you picture a cross in your head, the middle of the cross, where the arms come off, is the main room of the house. And on the ceiling above that middle room, there's these weird points that are built out, coming out, that almost look like a pentagram as well.
Wow.
And so each arm of the cross is a separate room, and then there's the center room, and then the long part of the cross is another room where his chair is, where he shot, where he died in. That's where and Brenda ended up meeting the neighbor who was a friend of this guy, whose name was Curtis, who shot himself. She ended up meeting the neighbor who knew Curtis and his wife, and told her all the stories, and then they ended up getting married, of all things.
What?
And Brenda moving in next door to the house, and she owned the property in the house anyway. So all these things she was finding out during research over the years, and there's a whole bunch more. I mean, we could spend 2-3 hour show talking about just the house. She hired a local guy to be a maintenance guy to help her fix this house up. He went under the house to check the pipe. He was under the crawl space, and it's only like 3 feet high, so it's pretty small. You got to crawl on your hands and knees to get through there. So he's noticed these mounds of dirt under the house, and he had to get the pipes to look at them. So he pushed one of the mounds of dirt aside, and an arm bone came out. A bone came out of the dirt.
Oh my God!
And just as he's looking at this bone, trying to figure out if it's a human bone or an animal bone, something attacked him under the house in a sexual manner, and he crawled out of there as fast as he could, handed the bone to Brenda, and said, "I'm out of here." So she took the bone to the local doctor, and he said it was a child's arm bone, and it's very old. So not only that, he told her, when I was under there, I also saw a pit that's dug in the center, where the center room is of the House of the Cross. Directly under that, there's a pit dug with granite rocks around it, and there was ashes in the pit.
Ooh.
So like some kind of ceremonial something. Under the house.
They prepared that land before they built that house on there.
Yeah. Yeah. So something really weird with all that. Now, we don't know if there's a graveyard under the house or not, because that whole area was Native American land as well. All around that area, there's Native American burial mounds. There's 2 rivers that come into the town together. A whole bunch of stuff. There's actually a whole separate story about the willow tree in the front yard. The same maintenance guy. This guy's been through the mill with the house. Let me tell you.
I can imagine. He must have been that house.
Yeah, he was mowing the grass for her, and then he decided he was going to trim the willow tree, and because the leaves are, the limbs are hanging all the way to the ground.
Right.
So after he trimmed a few branches off to where he could mow, he got back on the mower, and something threw him through the air, and he landed hit his back next to on the edge of the front cement porch, and actually fractured his back.
Oh my!
Another instance, him and Brenda were painting the upper level of the house, the outside, and they had pulled the truck up and then put the ladder in the truck so they could reach the top, right?
Mm-hmm.
So he's up there painting, and she's down there at the bottom holding the ladder for him, and he's saying, "I can hear a woman's voice in there talking, screaming at me, just telling me to get the F out of here, blah, blah, blah." And he said then the ladder started shaking, and he was pushed with the ladder backwards and went 20-some feet to the ground. And he just laid there with the breath knocked out of him. And Brenda's like, "Are you okay? Are you okay?" He said, "Yeah, I'm okay. I got to get my breath back." And she goes, "Well, I'll paint it, damn it." And they put the ladder back in the truck. She got up there, started painting, and then the ladder started shaking violently again. And then she decided to get down. So there's so many things that happened. And some friends of hers came by when they were working on the house, and she said, "Don't touch the willow tree. It's got bad juju or something." And they're like, "I don't believe in that crap, And he ripped a branch off of the tree and threw it in the dashboard of the car. And there's 3 guys in the car, 2 brothers and their friend. They take off down the road. They start fighting uncontrollably in the car for some unknown reason.
Okay.
And the car goes flipping down the road and smashes into a tree in a graveyard. And they're all 3 life flighted out of there, and they're all broken up to this day from it. Now Curtis, the last man that killed himself in the house,
right?
See, his wife before that either OD'd in the house or she accidentally OD'd. But on the death certificate, she said she was dead in the hospital. But the neighbor that Brenda married said no, she was dead in the house. I saw her body. I saw them take her out.
Yeah, sometimes they'll do that.
Yeah, and they didn't pronounce her dead.
Right, they don't pronounce her dead until somebody can certify, that they pronounce them. So, yeah.
Years after that, Curtis was dating this other girl, younger girl, who was helping him and doing stuff and whatnot. And they started dating and whatnot. Well, they broke up and she had left. Well, after Curtis died, she came to the house and was talking to Brenda, and because she just happened to want to go back there, and she asked Brenda, "Can I take a piece of the willow tree home with me?" And she said, "No." She said, "I don't recommend that. I don't recommend that. Don't do it. But if you want to, go ahead, but I don't recommend it." She goes, "Well, I just want to take it for a memento." And she goes, "Well, I wouldn't do that, but you're free to do what you want." So this woman and she was young. She was only in her mid-30s. She takes a piece of the willow tree. A few months later, Brenda finds out she died of unknown, mysterious circumstances.
Let me tell you something. I wouldn't touch that willow tree for nothing in the world. Absolutely.
Every time I'm around it, I think it's something to do with Native Americans, because the willow tree is sacred to Native Americans, and I always offer tobacco and all that to it. Very respectful. I would never cut it. I'm not going to cut it. Nothing. There's something to it. Plus, there's a whole nother story of this house. This guy back in the late early 1900s, I think the original builder's son had moved into the house, and he married this woman who already had some kids, and they ended up having like 23 kids together, right?
Holy crap. No TV,
huh? Yeah, long story short, they found out he was molesting his stepdaughter, and they actually had a baby together.
Who, him and the stepdaughter?
Yes. So and there was rumors of abuse and all this stuff, and back in those days, it wasn't as frowned upon as it is today. But what they did, they took him to court, and they found him guilty. I've got all the paperwork, and they fined him $700, which was a ton of money back in those days.
Yeah, it was.
All they did was fine this guy, right? So going back to this guy, one evening he went out to feed the hogs. This was a big farm at one time.
Okay.
He went out, and he didn't come back, so they went looking for him. They found him laying in the hog pen, and he was being eaten alive by his own hogs.
Oh, my God.
The hogs had eaten his ear off, part of his foot, and his entrails were hanging out. He was still alive. So they drug him back into the house, trying to, help him and stuff. So his blood's all in the house, and he ends up passing away in the house. To me, that's some really bad.
Let me tell you something. I swear to God, I know that, but talk about karma.
Yeah, exactly. That's some serious karma, like the devil. So, and then there was another older couple that lived in the house. The wife died in the house. The man became a recluse. He actually lived in the bathroom. And if you've seen the bathroom in the house, it's no bigger than your car. Let me tell you. He lived and slept in there and slept in the bathtub. They found him dead one day in the bathtub. So you've got a ton of different deaths in there.
Oh,
There's pictures of the old woman snapped in the front window and by another group they got wigged out, and they went hauling butt out of there. And the last guy in line out the door heard something behind him, turned around, took a quick snapshot, and it's the spitting image of the old woman's obituary that died in the house. I mean, it looks just like her. And So I mean, it's one of those locations that's got a ton of stuff going on.
Yeah, layers.
Yeah, and the whole history has never been put out on it. I'm currently working on that, getting it all in line as much as possible. I got a ton of factual information that's going to be put out on it. And basically, right now, I'm not even letting any groups in there other than close friends because I feel it is a dangerous location, and I want the history put out, and then I'll decide what I'm going to do. It's probably going to be my own paranormal laboratory at this point, but I've let a few groups in here and there, but right now it's closed for investigations. But, you know, it's a very unique place. I have a friend that's from Indiana who also runs the Geyer Opera House. His group runs the paranormal investigations there, and he works in the insurance industry, and he's literally been in tens of thousands of buildings and structures. And I had him come out to the house, and he said he's never seen a house like this built anywhere.
The structure,
ever.
You mean?
Right, the structure. He said and he's been doing it for 40 years.
Yeah.
So, you know, there's definitely something unique about this place, the shape it's built in. Who knows what all went on there? I think there was some witchcraft done in there at some point and other things. So who knows, man? And, you know, you got the American connection.
Let me tell you something. If what you were saying is if the original builder, which probably specifically chose that location for, in other words, it wasn't random.
Right.
Chose it. You know, if anybody, you know, that is working with necromancy, which is, of course, working with the dead for whatever, if they have the opportunity, they start with the structure because the structure is part of how they invoke whatever it is that they're going to do. In other words, they can amplify it. So they're big into building outward, inwards, you know, starting with that structure. So, yeah, what you're describing is that unusual way it was built. Yeah, it wasn't because the guy was crazy in that way. It was because he did it on purpose for a reason.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel that is built to funnel energy in and out, you know, the way the windows are on the corners of the house. And there's numerous videos I have from Brenda who put up security cameras in there. And she put those big plastic kids play balls, you know, in the house.
Right.
And she would, she showed, I've got all the video. Everything is mine that she had, you know, it's all given to me. And these balls would be sitting in different chairs on the coffee table. And then so many different times they would roll off by themselves, roll around like someone was playing with them. And they would all seem to center right over that pit that was dug under their house, right in the center room. And it's almost like it's an open portal, you know, like it's sucked energy. And there's been numerous people scratched, attacked in the house, shadow figures seen, just a whole plethora of things that have happened there by numerous people. And, you know, a little girl is often seen. Brenda says that for months at a time, you know, no one would go in the house and they would see the curtains move like somebody was in the house looking out at them, you know, and she knew there was nobody in there. It was locked up tight, you know, nobody in there. Right. And because they would often have picnics because they live right next door, and they have it has a huge like a barn type structure in the back with, and they would have the family over having picnics, and they would see the windows, the curtains move.
Yeah, that twitching thing, and you're thinking somebody's peeking out. Yeah.
There's no power in the house. There's no AC going on. Nothing that could do that. You know, so it's just a ton of different stuff.
Dave, has anything bled over to them, to their property? Because I know sometimes.
Well, I'll tell you, after all that happened to her husband, he had a stroke and a heart attack both times he had worked on the house. So they said that's it, we're done, and they moved 20 miles back across the Illinois border. I mean, and
I don't blame him. And how about that repairman? Does that handyman still work on that property? Because I don't know.
Actually, he works for me, but he will not go in the house. He mows the lawn for me and whatnot.
Oh,
but,
really?
He told me a lot of stuff. You know, he's told me a lot of stuff. And he's a really nice guy, and you know, but he will not go back under the house or in the house at all.
Don't blame him. So, that is,
crazy.
It's like that thing about I'll mow the lawn, but this is as far as it goes, and definitely I'm not going to help you paint or go into the house.
You know, there's all kinds of other rumors that go along with this house about this one woman, and I've been able to confirm none of this because Brenda told me the neighbor lady, who has now deceased, she was a much older lady, but she was there when this supposedly happened, told her that a woman had moved in with her older son, and she had a young daughter, and she did, and the rumor was that she had been married 2 or 3 different times, and all these men came to weird deaths, mysterious deaths, just all 3 of her husbands. Well, all of a sudden one day, this little girl of hers disappeared, and no one ever saw her again, heard anything, knew anything. And then several years later, her son actually hung himself in the house too. To me, I think the mom actually probably killed the little girl, and that could be her arm bone under the house. Her body may still be under my house.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's possible. Absolutely, that's possible. And you know what?
The son may have knew and hung himself over the guilt of it.
Sure. And
it's a very negative location.
And also, she could have done away with her husbands. I mean, and let's face it, a lot of times, especially if it was a few years back, people had a really hard time thinking that women could commit murders like that, like very cold-bloodedly as in a psychopath. And it's like, a lot of point in case, Lizzie Borden. I mean, it's from there. It's like,
all she had to do was say, well, he ran off with some other woman or something. They just believe him. Back in those days, they didn't care. This was like in the 40s or 50s when this whole event, these events. But the last person that died in the house, Curtis, this was 2012, so it wasn't that long ago. Brenda had this, and all these things happened. I think, or was it 2009? 2009, yeah. So something around that time. I can't remember off the top of my head because there's so many things that have happened that this happened. I'm trying to get to the bottom of it all right now. So
right, and I know that some things are documented, and then others is like what you're describing. It's like you're hoping a neighbor or a friend of a neighbor, somebody there can it's like oral. In other words, you're never going to find it documented.
Right.
It's like just talking to the person, somebody that hopefully hasn't died by the time you get to them. That will tell you.
That woman was renting the place anyway. I don't think she owned it. I think she was most likely renting it, and who knows what all went down.
Sure.
But just with all that alone, it's phenomenal. All the things that have happened, all the deaths in the house. I've got paperwork on most of it, probably 90% of what Brenda told me that she gave me, and not to mention all the other paranormal folks that have been in this house and have been attacked and seen things. And she also told me that she had several married couples that were investigators go in the house, and they stayed the night in the house, and every single one of those couples is now divorced.
Wow.
So, weird coincidence there.
What happened. Once you open it up, you need to put and I'm tempted to say put a sign next to the willow tree. Don't touch the willow tree, but then sometimes that has the opposite effect, where then everybody wants to touch it or take something from it.
Yeah, people like to tempt fate like that, and it can backfire on you in a hurry.
Sure. No, it sounds like a super interesting case, but I'm glad to see that you're one of these people that is cautious about stuff like this because you've experienced it firsthand. That.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
In other words, whatever is there, it sounds like it's intelligent and malevolent and doesn't like the handyman. I'm only kidding. But, in other words, that, and that thing about, let me tell you something, he's a brave guy. If I crawled under a house and I find a bone, that's like, forget, that's it. I'm never going back there again, ever.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff I still have to do. I've only had it since last summer, so I'm trying to get the timelines together with all the deaths in the house and get the factual paperwork on all that stuff, which I've got a lot of it already. And then I'm gonna put together a documentary about the place and all of that, and searching and investigating it. And that's all you can do with this, because probably never going to find out, the original guy that built the house and why he built it and like that, but there is rumors, but it is what it is.
Right. Let's face it. Nobody, especially back then, is going to say, by the way, I'm specifically building this house because I'm going to be calling up the dead and for whatever. People thought, oh, the house, it's like a cross.
Yeah.
Nobody announces that kind of stuff.
Yeah, well, over the years too, like there was like a on the backside there was like a overhang put up for the cement porch, and then in the front they put another little porch on. So just by looking at it from standing in front of it, you can't tell, but when you look from above down, you can definitely see the cross shape. I mean, it's clear as a
Right.
bell. They just added a few two little porches on it, which kind of takes the shape away a little bit. But you can, I mean, I got the original floor plans, and there's no mistaking it.
That
I mean,
yeah.
it's definitely in the shape of a cross. Um, and it's really weird too. There's no entrance to the attic. The only way you can get to the attic is through the outside upper window, and
Really?
that's strange. Yeah, it's really strange. So
That
why would you build
is.
a house like that with no way to get up to it? You know.
It's almost like usually when people do things like that, it's because they're either hiding something up there that they don't want anybody to actually have access to it unless they know that they have to gain access. But that is really weird. That's very
Yeah.
weird. And a lot of people don't realize that also when you are doing some of these ritualistic and dark magic stuff, it's not only in the ground, you do put things overhead as well. Like
Yeah,
what
and
you're describing in the rafters or over
yeah.
the living space, in other words.
There's a
Everybody always
false,
thinks it's just the buried stuff.
yeah, and there was a false ceiling in there. Was
Yeah.
that to save on? I don't know, but it's
Yeah.
really because Brenda, they were looking for the staircase to go up to the to the attic area,
Right. It's
and
like,
so they discovered the false ceiling in the place. And then when they took that out, they noticed those weird points coming out of the real ceiling that seemed to focus all the energy to the center room. Really
yeah,
weird stuff. I've got a lot of videos on my YouTube channel of it. You can check it out there.
sure.
Real supernatural. I've got a ton of investigation videos on there, and a
Yeah.
a lot of stuff going on. We have a big convention coming up in Wheeling, West Virginia on June 16th. Society of the Supernatural,
Okay.
um, putting on the first West Virginia Supernatural convention there up at the
Okay.
casino. So we got John Zaffis coming, Rosemary Ellen Guiley,
Mm-hmm.
David Weather, Allison, myself, Sean Austin, um,
That's
guy
a
named
great
Eric
lineup.
Stan Gordon, and a guy named Steve Hummel that runs a little museum up in Moundsville. So got a lot of stuff going on. It's going to be a great conference. Ton of vendors, ton of haunted location owners going to be there. We got
Okay.
the folks coming. We've got Geyer Opera House coming. Kosciuszko County Jail from Indiana coming. We've got the 360 cabin down in Virginia folks coming up. Going to be a lot of good folks there. And
Yeah,
then
let me tell
Friday
you something. You hear, I mean, I was at Scarefest last October, and people don't realize, despite you hear the best, most interesting stories when you go to, like you said, a bunch of people that are in to the paranormal is when you really hear some great, fantastic experiences and stories.
Yeah, and we also have Kristen Lee, who's a member of our group, Society of the Supernatural, as well. She owns the Blair House, and
Mm-hmm.
Friday night we're doing a VIP event, meet and greet, and investigating the Blair House. So there's only a few tickets left of that, folks. If you want to get one,
Yes,
you know,
yes, and I
please
know
get it.
that's like really, yeah, and it's, I a lot of times people, when Halloween comes around, they pay money to go to these, haunted houses, but this is the real stuff. This is the real stuff, like what's happening, with the Bel Air house and things like that. As
Oh
far
yeah,
as if you want to
tickets
have,
are
I'm sorry,
for
go
the
ahead.
convention. Go ahead. Tickets are only $10 for the convention too. That's as
That's
cheap as you
great.
can get.
That is
You know.
fantastic. That's very doable. That's very doable. And by the way, I've
Oh
been
yeah.
to Moundsville. When you said that thing about Moundsville, I've been to Moundsville. That's a special place there.
Oh yeah. It's right up the road where we're having a convention,
Oh,
like
really?
just miles from there,
Okay.
maybe 8 miles. So yeah.
Okay, I've been.
Yep.
Anyway, Dave, thank you. So, I know we're coming up on, we just went through that, the whole interview, and it's been great. And I was even going to ask you about your books, but I'm hoping that you're going to come back and we can talk about that last book you released about the Flatwoods Monster. And I would love to talk to you about that. And I'm hoping you're going to come back and maybe after you do this convention, so, you could tell. And I'm fascinated by Willow's Weep. It's scary, but I'm fascinated. I'm truly fascinated because you're taking the trouble to do the research. Because I'm a big believer in research. It's like I'd rather know the truth versus the made up. Sometimes you get these places get reputations, and then when you do a little bit of investigating, you find out three-quarters of it is made up. Uh,
Yeah.
I'd rather have the real stuff, and I've done research in some places that what you find out is actually more disturbing than the made up stuff. Is like, why are you this stuff here is a lot more uh, scarier if you want to, as far as dark, than the
Oh, yeah.
stories, the urban myths that are circulated about it. So yeah, I'm fascinated when with the research that you've done on that place, and absolutely, yeah, I could see where.
There's a lot coming out on that. I'm going to do a book on the place, and just to get the history out right and all the factual stuff that's going on there. And then a lot of different encounters from different paranormal investigators. What they've experienced in the house, as well as myself and others. And Brenda, she's going to be in the book. I've interviewed her extensively and her
Right,
family members. Because it's all part of the story of that house. So,
right.
and I'm now the owner of it. So, um, you know,
But you're the right
I got
person for it because you sound like you know the you respect it. And as far when I say respect, I mean as far as when you're told these stories, you know that it's not somebody just saying wild tales when they describe this stuff.
absolutely no. I mean, somebody in their right mind would not make up these type of things because there's they would have their reputation to lose or to
Sure,
be made fun of. I mean,
absolutely.
it's some of the things we look for. Especially when you have credible people. Like law enforcement officers,
Hmm.
military officers, all kinds of different folks
Yes.
about the experiences they've had.
Right.
You got to really step back and say, hey, these guys have something to lose. These gentlemen and ladies have something to lose by going
Oh.
out on the limb and saying, hey,
Ab-
this one time this happened to me. I saw this. I can't
hmm.
explain it. You know,
And a lot of them, as a matter of fact, they kind of fess up. They say it like you said after they retire or they're not working in that anymore, where they feel safe. This is not going to hurt my career unofficially, because sometimes that's the way it works. And they come out and they'll talk about the experiences or things that they've had. So when they do it, even when they're still involved, like you said, in law enforcement or in some type of, what they call trained observer, that means that it was like they're impressed by it. They need to talk about it. It's like, I can't wait 20 years till I retire to describe what I saw or what happened to
absolutely.
me.
Yeah, absolutely.
So again, Dave, thank you so much. You have been absolutely wonderful, and I loved talking to you. Paranormal researcher after my own heart. You've got a lot of years, and when you come up, and like I tell everybody, despite what everybody thinks, paranormal researchers have a very high bar as far as skepticism when it comes to paranormal events. We don't buy into it from the get-go because we know what the real thing is because we've
Yeah,
experienced
absolutely.
it. We've
Thank,
experienced it.
thank you for having me on. I enjoyed every minute. Anytime you want me on, you just let me know.
Absolutely. Take care, Dave. Good luck to you.
Okay, you too. Good night.
Good night. Oh God, that Willow's weak place. What? Oh my. See, it's almost the paranormal researcher means going. I want to go. I want to go. I want to go. And then my when you think you're gonna fit that in? Because as you know, guys, I live in a farmhouse. I live in a 100-year-old farmhouse, and I've gone from backyard chickens. I'm incubating chicks, and plus the traveling. Remember, I live all the way on the south end of Florida. Just to get out of Florida, it's almost like 6 hours. But yeah, plus it would take care of all my animals. But which every once in a while, of course, I tell my kids, remember all the stuff I used to do for you. I need for you to come and take care of my kids. In other words, I lay a guilt trip on them. But again, like I told them, that's that convention. Conventions are great to network. You meet a lot of interesting people, and I'm not kidding you. This is where you hear stories and experiences that people have had that sometimes it's like when you're in person with a group of people or a couple of people, you confide, you start talking about things like, hey, you know what? I've never talked about this, but blah, 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 blah. This happened to me, you know? And I'm telling you, the setting as far as And by the way, that rate of $10 is super, super. Let me tell you something. That's very affordable. There's some conventions that I've been to that they're great, they're interesting, but you got to pay for it at the door. So that they're probably going to get a lot of traffic there just because it's so reasonable. But I'm telling you, Dave, as you know, he absolutely has a lot of years of experience, and I've said this before, and I'm going to say it again. That is one of the things you could tell for somebody that's been doing this for quite a while, because a lot of people that are nouveau, what I mean by that is that they've been into it maybe 2, 3, 4, 5 years. As a matter of fact, kind of dovetails the time where reality TV has taken off, and they're thinking, either confrontation or provocation, or I'm going to go in there and I'm going to have the. And it's like, there's absolutely nothing wrong from stepping back from an investigation or a location, either temporarily or forever. Okay? And there are some places that got spiritual turbulence going on in their walls. Whether it's because there was a lot of dysfunction and it's layers and layers and it's residual, or whether it's intelligent, but it can be addressed, it can be handled, it can be taken care of. By the way, in a series of things, and because I've worked with families on this, it's this idea sometimes that people get that you're gonna go around your house and sprinkle holy water and salt and then poof, it's gone. No, it doesn't work that way, folks. Yes, you do have to have something, you know, monumental. Well, not monumental, but something like a big giant to get it out. But to maintain it, you've got to work at it, on a day-to-day basis, weekly basis, and you'll see where gradually everything just that blackness or that darkness starts to fade out and get thinner. And in other words, but my point being that there's places that can be handled, but there's other places that cannot. I've been there and I've known of some of them. And you know what? You've heard me on other shows say that sometimes I've heard certain psychics tell people, if I were you, I would move. And I know that sometimes that's not really viable for a lot of reasons, for a lot of families. But I recognize that there are locations where it's not practical to do it. And by this, I mean the fault. That, yeah, eventually you could wear it down and cast out, exercise, whatever's there, whatever you want to call it. But what it would do to you as a human being in that process, because like I said, it's not going to be like a clap of thunder and that's it. Whatever was here is gone. It's not. That battle for you to win that war would decimate you so much so spiritually, emotionally, physically, and sometimes even your life, that it's not worth it. That it's like, okay, you know what? This place is dark. And your best option, if you're going to give somebody advice about it, would be to leave it. Let go, as a matter of fact. And don't move close by either. Put a few miles between yourself and that location. I would say that that's the lesser, but yeah, that does happen. And that Willow's Weep, I'm telling you, if I went to look at a house and a pipe comes across the room and hits my kid on the head, I'd be like, and the owner doesn't want to step aside. It's like, okay, this is somebody telling me not this house. But again, you know what? A lot of people, and I've spoken about this, a lot of times because people don't want to appear like they're imaginative. They don't go with that prickly feeling that they get along their back or what their gut tells them, or even not even their gut. Like they don't see the signs here. I've got an owner who refuses to come in the house. Oh, because my dad, the flying pipe thing will do it for me. But anyway, people sometimes they get a lot more subtle hints as far as, let's say they go to a location and they don't want to get the oh, my imagination's running away with me, and they overlook it, they dismiss it, and they go forward and either purchase or rent locations where it's like sometimes you need to go with a feeling. You need to go with it and just like get out of there like right away. But let's face it, what he described, that research that they did as far as the sales and the renters and the history it has on it, a lot of times people don't find out about that till way after the fact, as in that they're there. Either they sunk money into it because if they rented it, they gave a deposit, first, last, and whatever. I mean, a chunk of money, or if they bought it, even more bigger investment, and then you just find out this really dark history on the place, and it's like, oh crap, now what? So, yeah, it is what it is. In other words, pay attention to your prickly feelings, and before you ever move in a place, and I don't care how beautiful, how wonderful, how clean, how well painted, how well kept, how well maintained it looks, how beautiful the curb appeal is, I would not step foot in a house, much less move my family, my belongings, and myself in there until I thoroughly cleansed it with prayers, smudging, salting, and I'm not only talking the house, I'm talking also the property itself. At least that's me. Like I said, I would leave an investigation and smudge my car, even opening up the trunk. Better safe than sorry when it comes to this. So again, guys, I hope you liked the show. I loved it. I love speaking to Dave. If you're in that neck of the woods, or if you can travel, definitely. It sounds like great to go out to this convention that they're going to have out there in West Virginia. Also, you can. I do have his website on the credits of the show. From there, you can link to see what's going on with him, as far as also to any videos he has out. Also, his books. Anything he's got coming up. He sounds like he's a busy guy. And again, guys, if you're one of my true believers, do not forget about me. Go to MiamiGhostChronicles.com. Go to the Submit Your Story tab. I've been getting some great stories and I'm putting them together. And that's just a little bit time consuming. And again, if you're willing, people are so shy. They write, they send me these stories, they write. I was like, you know what? If you want to, we could Skype and you could tell me about it. It doesn't have to be written out, whatever. Don't forget about me. I want to hear about your unusual experiences, whatever they might be. And thank you again for being part of my audience and sharing this time with me. Take care.